And we're back. So I got some things set up there. Sorry, guys. I was doing some different things there. I love being live. We're like 5 minutes off on the show. So, hey, real quick, what I did wanted to kind of put out there before I got going. A friend of mine on Facebook, his name is Eric. He wanted all of us to know out there in the amputee world about something he's putting together called National Amputee Movie Night. It's specifically for the movie that The Rock is in called Skyscraper, which is going to be premiering, I guess, or he's trying to set it up for the Rock's, the release, which is going to be on Friday, July 13th. He wants all of us amputees to go out, family, friends, everybody to check out this movie because Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is playing an amputee in this movie. So if you can spread the word, National Amputee Movie Night, and he's trying to get that started. You're going to hear me say that again once I start the show, but I wanted to get out there and give him a special plug. Eric, there you go. I'm actually going to go see that too. So hopefully all you guys will tune into that and check it out. All right. Now, with no further ado, let me get myself back over here and get this show started. As you can see, we have a really good show tonight. So I hope you guys enjoy the topic. It's going to be a very interesting topic. Bear with me while I queue up and get going. Welcome, everybody, to Amp Life Talk Radio. Thanks for another episode. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. And I'm so appreciative to be able to do what I do. So let me get this going.
You are listening to Sean Harrison on Amp Life Talk Radio, a place for amputees and those dealing with limb loss. The views expressed on the show by the host, co-hosts, and guests are their own. Always seek medical advice from a licensed medical professional.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Amp Life Talk Radio. I'm so happy to have all you back. Yes, some of you saw a little blurb up on the Facebook page, reorganizing, reshuffling the studio here. I got a little bit better set up. So as you can see, those of you that can see me Facebook live video, you can see the look is a little bit different. My head is right in front of my poster. But the background has changed up a little bit. I think it looks a little bit better, I guess. And you got me a little bit closer, man, all up in your face. And for those of you that are in podcast land, you have no clue what I'm talking about because you're obviously not on Facebook Live, so you don't see this. But I do want to welcome everybody, all of you that are in podcast land, those of you that are on Facebook Live. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for tuning in. And man, we have a very interesting topic to talk about. Season 2, episode 25. I think we might be at 26. I better double check that. We're rolling right along. We are really rolling right along tonight. And I kind of put some teasers up on my Facebook page with some different questions about this. And we're dealing with the decision to salvage or amputate. Now, that is a tough subject, and it's something that is probably going to touch home with a lot of you out there. And I'm quite sure, hopefully you will understand where I'm coming from with this, because I do see a lot of different things that in my work doing things. But the decision to salvage or amputate is a very tough question for any person to handle when that is presented to them. So I want to touch on some topics tonight that will give you some food for thought. I want to talk about the economics of it. I want to talk about the different strategies that the medical industry or doctors look at, and the medical industry itself, insurance, what their philosophy, what their thoughts are, how they look at it. So we're going to go into this where I'm all different angles. It's my opinions based on some of the research and information that I've read and looked at, and I'm going to put this into a nice little package tonight that hopefully you'll get something from. So most of you have probably been faced with this decision, seeing that this is a amputee show for amputees, talking about amputations and the various things that we go through. The decision to salvage or amputate a severely necrotic, diabetic, or painful or injured limb is one that most people find very difficult to make. It is a very difficult decision, not only for yourself, but I think for the most part, it's difficult for the surgeon, the orthopedic team. And this is probably some of the toughest things that they face on their end in their profession. Making the decision to change somebody's life in such a finite and drastic way, I think, is something really hard to do. And when we're talking about the decision to salvage or amputate, there's a lot of variables that go into that. Recent reports have suggested that functional outcomes are similar following either an amputation or reconstruction of a severely injured or lower extremity. A study has and was performed to compare a 2-year direct health care cost, and they projected out the life health time costs associated with these two treatment pathways. What do you think they found? When costs associated with rehospitalization and post-acute care were all added to the cost of the initial hospital visit or hospital stay, the 2-year cost of reconstruction and amputation were similar. That's what they found. Now, as we get into this talk a little bit more, we're going to find that you're going to get some other numbers thrown at you and some other studies thrown at you. When a prosthesis or when prosthesis related costs were added to this study that they did, so they looked at basic amputation. And when I say amputation, they were talking amputation without looking at a prosthetic device for you. So when they threw in the costs related to getting a prosthesis, there was a substantial difference between the two groups. $81,000 for patients treated with reconstruction and $91,000 for patients treated with amputation. The projected lifetime healthcare costs for the patients who had undergone an amputation was 3 times higher than that of those that were treated with reconstruction costs. Do you want to know what those numbers were? The first one, 509 million. The other one, 163 million, respectively. So they're looking at this cost. Oh, sorry, I got my numbers off here. 509,000. Okay. So it went from 81 to 509,000. So you're looking at basically a little bit under $500,000. The other one was 163,000. So, man, when you're looking at the cost that they did with this study, as far as with prosthetics or amputation, reconstruction, without even a prosthesis, but once they throw that into the mix, the cost. My question is why? Why is it so expensive? We're going to get to that. But when you think about it, reconstruction surgery versus amputation, you would think amputation would be the better route as far as costs. Well, let me say, it all depends on who does the study. That's one of the things that I saw in some of the research that I was doing online. Now, vascular disease such as diabetes, peripheral artery disease are the primary causes of amputations or limb loss. To be exact, 54%. However, trauma is the next most common cause of limb loss at 45%, with the remaining 1% of limb loss being caused by cancer. One of the things that I found in looking on the internet was how we got numbers, how they come up with these numbers. Well, one of the things that I found very interesting was a news clip from our past president, Mr. Obama. And he basically gave out some numbers that I think got a little bit misused in some of these studies, because as I did some of my research, I found that some of these studies were based on what Mr. Obama was talking about. And when we talk about limb salvage versus amputation, I threw a question out there that said to you, do you think doctors take into account how much they make off an amputation in this scenario? Some of you answered the question, some of you didn't. But I want to throw something at you that's going to make you think a little bit. And I want you to keep it in your hip pocket as we go through the rest of the show. This is from President Obama giving an analysis or answering a question about healthcare and how much amputations cost. So I want you to listen to this, and you're going to be probably surprised with the number that he threw out. And we're going to talk about that. But here's President Obama explaining to a town hall person that asked this question about Medicare costs and medical costs when it comes to amputations. And this is what he said.
All I'm saying is let's take the example of something like diabetes, one of a disease that's skyrocketing, partly because of obesity, partly because it's not treated as effectively as it could be. Right now, if a family care physician works with his or her patient to help them lose weight, modify diet, monitors whether they're taking their medications in a timely fashion, they might get reimbursed a pittance. But if that same diabetic ends up getting their foot amputated, that's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Immediately, the surgeon is reimbursed. Well, why not make sure that we're also reimbursing the care that prevents the amputation, right? That will save us money.
Now, those numbers that he threw out, I have to let you know that those are actually incorrect numbers. So when we're looking at the numbers that I threw out to you earlier, not the millions, what doctors make, what percentage of money doctors make versus doing limb salvage versus doing an amputation, it really, I must say, it really doesn't even come into the equation. And I know some of you have probably thought, this doctor must be making a killing on cutting my leg off. That's why he's going to it so quick. Well, in actuality, they don't make a lot of money doing an amputation. Now, there is the question that when we go down the road of limb salvage, are they being paid for each procedure that they do? That's a whole nother cookie that we'll have to look at another date and another time. But on the whole, doctors don't make these incredible amounts of money like Mr. Obama said, $30,000, $40,000 reimbursed from Medicare. Medicare just does not do that. I'm going to be very real with you and tell you they don't do that. So where he got those numbers from, I have no clue. I think there is a huge misconception about how much doctors make to perform an amputation, which we all need to understand that in order to be able to better deal with the decision, limb salvage or amputation. When we come back from this break, we're going to get in what we need to consider and talk about this topic, both of these topics, a little bit deeper. So hang on after the break.
Sean Harrison.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're talking about limb salvage versus amputation and what it means. It means a lot to each and every person. But before we continue, let's thank our sponsor for this night's segment of the show, segment one. And I would like to thank Central Valley Specialty Hospital of Modesto, California. They are working with us to help their patients get the best care, especially prosthetic wise. And we also do a lot of peer counseling for people that come to their with their amputations. It's very wonderful to work with the staff there, Caesar and Phil and the other medical staff there. Always a great experience when I go to that facility. Central Valley Specialty Hospital of Modesto, California. Thank you for sponsoring this segment of Amp Life Talk Radio. Segment one, when to consider amputation. I think that's the first thing we should really put on the plate tonight, because I think when most doctors come to you, they're coming to you saying, hey, we have a situation. So there's amputation and there's limb salvage. So let's look at this. A surgeon may consider amputating a limb that has sustained 1, a high-grade open fracture, 2, a severe vascular injury, 3, significant nerve damage, such as to the posterior tibial nerve. I guess we all should understand how important nerves and bones and our vascular system is important to providing blood to our lower extremities. Of course, the clearest indication for immediate amputation is the situation where they have no other choice. It's inevitable. And they have to do an amputation. These could be traumas where you basically are brought in and it's life or death. So others are where limb salvage has basically failed and it's a life and death situation again. So in these situations, it's not really much up for discussion because they're trying to save your life. Another factor that's predictive of limb salvage or limb salvage failure is the degree of damage to the soft tissue. Here, coverage is key. Your tissue, they're going to need tissue to cover your body. I mean, your body has to stay enclosed and intact so nothing gets inside of it. Quick, successful coverage with an adequate vascular supply. I know I lost my foot because, 1, I didn't have adequate blood flow to my foot from my motorcycle accident because I had mangled foot. So vascular supply is very important, and you need that in order to keep that lower limb kicking and moving and doing what it needs to do. Other considerations related to associated injuries and aspects of a patient's physical status. Overall, you get what's called an injury score. So when you come in, especially if you're a trauma, you're getting an injury score. These doctors look at you and they're trying to figure out, how do you rate on this system? The presence of shock or compartment syndrome, the preoperative status of the injured extremity, your limb, comorbidities, the patient's age, fluid balance, nutritional status, your smoking history. That's why I tell everybody, don't smoke. All these things are going to be played or going to play a role into if you're going to get an amputation. Keep in mind, I want to say this before we get a little bit too far off in here. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different types of scenarios. Like I said, we have trauma, we have diabetes, and we have cancer. The majority of the amputation scenarios that we're going to be talking about tonight for limb salvage or amputation mostly are going to be dealing with disease-related issues or trauma. Okay, I just want to make sure I put that out there before we really get off into this and start getting into some more stuff. The amputation process is sometimes, it's long. Before the amputation, different procedures are hopefully performed and accomplish an attempt to save the limb. Even for me, I want to go ahead and put this out there. So when we're talking about considering amputation, I was a motorcycle trauma. Boom, got hit on my bike. My foot was stuck in my front wheel, crushed. Boom, went to the hospital. They did a surgery on me to repair my foot. Believe it or not, they tried to save it. Even though I had 2 of my arteries crushed, one was completely gone, one was trickling, and very poor blood flow to my right foot. They tried to save it. And I went, I mean, thank goodness I was only in there for about 3 or 4 days before I made that decision to amputate my foot. Some of you have probably been dealing with this a lot longer. I understand that. Doctors use this scoring system to predict, the status of your amputation. Should they amputate? The Mangled Extremity Syndrome Index. This is what they call the MESI. And I'm quite sure they did that on me, which considers 10 factors. Your injury, the severity of it, you get a score for that. Injury to your limb, nerve, artery, vein, and bone, damage to all of those. And they look at that. They plus look at your age, pre-existing diseases, conditions, medical history. They're going to take all this into effect. One of the things I found that was interesting is that when I was reading through this, they have 2 types of scoring systems. One is called the Mangled Extremity Syndrome Index, and the other one is called the Predictive Salvage Index, PSI, where they basically kind of do the same thing. The second one, they take into consideration some other things, and it's basically called, I hope I say this right, NISA. I think I'm saying it right. It's NISSSA, and that's a scoring system. And they take into consideration your soft tissue, ischemia, nerve injury, soft tissue contamination, skeletal damage, shock, and age. So they're all kind of taking into to consideration the same things when they're looking at you and making a determination if they're going to save or salvage your limb or amputate the limb. Most of you who are amputees probably didn't even know this was going on or was in the mix when it came down to you getting your amputation. If you do, you have a really good surgeon who was letting you in on some stuff that most of us had no clue they were considering, because I know I didn't. I had some great surgeons. So I had no clue this was what they were talking about and using to make that determination. And I think in the end, for me, I finally made that decision after I met Matthew Garibaldi at UCFF, him telling me about prosthetics and what can be done and the awesomeness of technology. I made that decision. So if you were in this, in this decision process and you got this information, I think you were probably one of the lucky few. Although such systems are helpful, these scoring systems, a patient's situation or status cannot be simply summarized by a number. I don't think so. These systems fail to consider some other factors. The patient, given the information about the outcome and the procedure, I think there are other things that need to be discussed when we're looking at salvage of a limb or amputation of a limb, and we're dealing with this openly and honestly with the patient. These things are called patient variables related to the patient's psychological, social, and economic status are important factors that are going to determine the quality of life that this person is going to have, depending on which path this surgeon says he's going to go down. So if this surgeon says, hey, I'm going down the limb salvage path, or I'm going down the amputation path, if they haven't taken these things into consideration, it could affect your life in a very negative way, and things could not turn out so good. Other factors that predict failure of prolonged limb salvage includes the inability to afford a prolonged absence from work. Who can afford to just, go in and take all this time off to go get surgery after surgery after surgery after surgery? And of course, you're going to need time off work to recover from those surgeries. And who has that type of social support system in place to take care of them in a manner like that? I know I don't. I was very lucky when I went through my surgery that I had a really good friend, Darcy, who helped me out and kind of just took me in and helped me. And if it wouldn't have been for her, man, my life, I'll just say this right now, my life probably wouldn't be where it's at now. I probably wouldn't be where I'm at right now, because that is a tough situation to go through. And unless you've got that strong system in place, it's going to be really hard to do that. So I think these patient variables that are not included into these studies that they do to determine cost and effectiveness of, limb salvage, when they're not taken into these patient variable situations, they're really not doing a proper study to really give you a good idea of, the correctness of what they're talking about. Financial status has been closely analyzed for these situations, but not, how can I say, not done from the patient standpoint, like what we're talking about. So financial status has not been really closely analyzed until recently in just a few studies. With Obamacare on its way out, indeed, these factors are going to be more important and more crucial to each patient that is faced with this decision, limb salvage or amputation. Other factors that predict how a patient is going to turn out are going to be insurance. Insurance is a big one. And as you heard earlier, Mr. Obama state that amputations cost $30,000 to $50,000 in that range. Man, imagine if that was true. Just imagine if that was true. Surgeons got that much for amputations. I don't think you would see limb salvage getting the the attention that it would be getting. The surgeon's reimbursement for a below the knee amputation is nowhere near that much. That's the first thing we need to make sure we all understand. Reimbursement for surgeons for below the knee amputations, I think, or to be more correct, you're probably looking at hundreds of dollars at the maximum top, probably about $8,000, but they're nowhere near $30,000 and $50,000. And don't forget, when a doctor does a surgery on you, especially an amputation or a salvage, there's a thing called global coverage, global fee, which means that doctor, you're under that doctor's care for 90 days. So for that 90 days, all your care is covered, meaning you don't come out of pocket for one thing as long as you're coming in to see that doctor regarding his post-operative care of you, whether it's in the hospital during that 90 days, you are going to be covered going to his office and doing all the different things you're doing. So now keep in mind, the primary physician who is treating you, or the surgeon who is treating you, that guy, that's the only amount of money he gets right there, whatever he charges for that amputation. And it's not the $30,000 or $50,000. Now keep in mind, if you were referred from a podiatrist and he referred you over, doctors don't share the cost. They don't share their profit. So one guy makes something, the next guy doesn't from that surgery of your amputation. So, and global coverage is a term that most of you probably have never heard, but please be aware that you need to understand global coverage when a doctor does surgery on you. Your post-operative care falls under this global coverage. So ask your doctor or medical team about that. Hey, and most of them will probably tell you, but you are covered for 90 days after your amputation. So make sure you do know that, so that you're not thinking that you don't have additional doctor visits once you leave the hospital. You do, and you need to go in and make sure you keep up with your care. Okay. We're going to be coming up into segment 2, where we want to talk about, does cost play a role in the decision to amputate? I know we've kind of touched on it, but I'm going to throw some other information at you and make you think a little bit harder about the cost of amputation in this world today, in the current insurance structure that we have here in America. Right back. Hey, as we come out of this little break, I want to mention something to you. Make sure you share the show, guys. I just put in my first order for the coffee mugs. Yes, I did. So if you're sharing the show tonight, I will be checking up on some of you and seeing how much you've shared the show. And after each show, if I know that everybody shared the show quite frequently, one of you, one lucky person who shared the show the most while I was live, will win a coffee mug. They're on their way. I'm going to be getting another set of coffee, or we'll say tumblers, engraved. I'll be ordering those soon, and we'll have those up for grabs as goodies for sharing the show. I appreciate it. Segment 2 of the show, we want to thank our sponsor for this segment, and it's Valley Wound Care, or Valley Wound Healing Center here in Modesto, California. They do awesome work. They're just about every Wednesday following up with my patients and seeing the wonderful work that they do there with patients, helping them heal after their surgeries. Valley Wound Healing Center in Modesto, California. Segment 2, does cost play a role in the decision to amputate? I know most of you are thinking, man, what is he talking about? Well, I put this question out there on social media, and some of you were shocked by it. You guys were taken back by it. Like, what is he trying to say? The mere thought of it I think was too much to handle for some of you. Well, my friends, that is what I'm here for, and that is to shock your conscience. I'm here to shake things up and make you think. I want to ask questions like that and put those things out there to you to make you think, because healthcare is in a weird place right now. And here it is. A study after study has shown costs following amputation and salvage were derived from data presented in a study that emerged from a lower extremity assessment project. This is another study that I found that gave me out some information, and I wanted to share it. The end result, amputation is more expensive than limb salvage of the limb. So now when you, like I said, when you add the prosthesis to the mix, amputation goes above limb salvage. Some of the studies show that amputations yield, we want to call them fewer quality adjusted life years. So meaning after amputation, your quality of life either gets better or worse. This study showed that the quality of life for people who got their amputation and got a prosthesis was actually worse than those who got a limb salvage or salvaged a limb. Now, salvage is deemed the dominant cost savings strategy for most insurance companies like Medicare, the VA, people like that. Now, keep in mind, this study here, like I said, all these studies are taken and done on various people. This one was done for traumas, okay? Now, keep in mind, traumas typically going to have a lot more stuff going on than a diabetic patient. or we'll say different things going on. So each group, and that's the thing I think we have to look at the most, is each group is different. You got your traumas, got your disease, diabetic related, and then you've got your others. But the ones that we deal with the most are in those two categories. So when we look at all these studies and what everybody did, they're all doing them, but they're doing them from a standpoint to where, who is it benefiting to do this study, to come up with these numbers? Well, the majority of studies that I went through, it always comes back to benefit the hospital or insurance, because when you look at it, limb salvage, hey man, we'll go in and we'll keep trying and we'll keep trying. And again, patient variables. Have they taken into consideration any of those before they started the limb salvage process? Now, I am probably not your norm, but my decision to amputate, and I was a trauma, my life has gotten 10 times better as an amputee. Keep in mind, age, physical condition, past health problems, those all play factors. They all play factors. How bad or severe was the trauma? All these things play into it. So when we look at this scenario or the issue that we're talking about tonight, it has so many different variables to place inside of it. Now, the lack of access to prosthetic prevents people with limb loss from living productive lives. It leads to poor rehabilitation outcomes and places amputees at risk for dangerous and costly secondary conditions such as obesity, cardiovascular disease, and additional amputations. This is information that was pulled from this study. When I read some of this, I find it hard to believe because I see so many active amputees. But there's also the other side of the story, people who don't do well. So I can honestly see where some of the numbers come from, and I can honestly see why a question like this needs to be asked. Does the cost of an amputation, does cost play a role in the decision to amputate? Now, here's the thing. Does it play a role? Yes, it does. But not from the standpoint like what we brought up in the beginning of the show where the doctor makes money. Oh, I'm making $1 gazillion, so I'm going to do them amputations. No, I think it's more from the insurance company. They don't want to pay out the money for amputation. So cost does play a role when you think about limb salvage versus amputation, especially if you're a guy like one of the guys who I had the pleasure of meeting through the show. And we're going to talk later this week because I wanted him to hear the show. Matt, I hope you're listening. When you're in a situation like that, where you want an amputation, but they continue to do limb salvage because it's cheaper and it's more cost effective. Now you see, hopefully the light switch clicked on, that cost does play a role. Not like you think it plays a role in the doctor's pocket, but in the healthcare industry, insurance pocket. So people like that who are saying, hey man, I want this thing done. I want to amputate. I want to move on with my life. And they just seem to not be able to get anyone to listen. And they continually go through amputate or limb salvage efforts when all they wanted to do was get an amputation and move on with their life. Cost does play a role. So remember that when we're thinking about limb salvage versus amputation. It has been proven that devices such as prosthetics can improve the physical and psychological functioning of a person with an amputation. Injuries and congenital physical disabilities by enabling them to be able to get up and do different things. So a person with a prosthetic device is going to start to see improvements. It may take a little time to get over the limb loss, but once this person is able to get back up and integrate into society, into family life, his kids, his work, we typically will see a better outcome. reducing their dependency on caregivers. It helps them mentally, psychologically, socially. People living with the loss of an absence or amputated limb face discouraging obstacles when trying to obtain prosthetic care. Some, unable to afford the prosthesis, places amputees at risk for dangerous and costly secondary conditions. Current insurance is basically covering prosthetic devices, but at a minimum. You're not going to get the best prosthetic. Insurance coverage for prostheses threaten their ability to live their life in a way that will contribute to society, to their family, getting back up and getting active, basically leaving them instead dependent on the state or federal programs. And the sad thing is, companies are imposing unrealistic caps or conditions on prosthetics. Cost does play a role in amputation. Some of these are one time, or we'll say one prosthetic for life. Some are $2,500 per life for prosthetics, $500 per year. And some companies are eliminating orthotics and prosthetic coverage altogether. So when we ask this question that we started the segment 2 off with, does cost play a role in the decision to amputate? Well, you're darn right it does, but it's not like what you think. Insurance companies are all about the bottom line. And I hate to say it, some hospitals are all about the bottom line. Over the last decade, major technological advancements have helped with prosthetics. Use of bionic arms, integration, all these things are playing major roles. Microcompressor knees, all these things are awesome, man. Such advances are driving the prosthetic industry to new limits, to new heights. But here's the problem. Insurance companies don't want to pay for that. They definitely don't want to pay for a $50,000 knee if you're not some young guy. And even if you are some young guy, they don't want to pay for that. The problem, when we're talking about salvage versus amputation, it seems the payment system, however, has not evolved with our advancement in technology. And it remains rooted in this historical treatment of prosthetic patients and amputees with just these out-of-date prosthetics that they're trying to put on people. They want to give you something that doesn't work. So when we look at this, salvage versus amputation, does cost play a role? Prosthetic devices are reimbursed by 5 main payers in the United States: private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, the United States Department of Defense, and the Veterans Affairs Health Administration. Government payers account for a majority of reimbursements for prosthetic limbs. They set the market standards for reimbursement in the United States. I hope you heard me right. Currently, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, reimburses prosthetic devices and services based on an L code system, whereby a single payment covers the device. supplies, and auxiliary services are all coded out under this system. As much as I don't want to admit it, money plays a big role in salvaging a limb versus amputating a limb. As you can see from some of the information we've covered so far in the show, all this information comes from oodles of research that I've looked, studies, all on Google, topic after topic, study after study. Medicare, Medi-Cal, and the VA all don't want to pay for prosthetic devices that will allow a person to return to a lifestyle that is close as to normal as possible. When making a choice between salvaging a limb and amputation, the patient should know that getting a proper prosthesis will require documentation by their doctor, which will be the most important thing in getting a device approved by your insurance. If your doctor does not have this documentation and has not documented properly, your insurance will fight you. They'll prolong the situation, and most of them will not pay. I go through this on a daily basis working with my company. We fight for patients on a daily basis to get them the proper type of prosthetic device. So when we talk about, does cost play a role in amputation? You bet it does. So as we go into our next segment of the show, I want to give you a minute to absorb what we just talked about. Segment 3, the real facts about limb salvage. And before we start this segment of the show, I want to say thanks to our next sponsor, which is Synergy Prosthetics, which provides prosthetic services in 3 different locations: SoCal, San Diego, the Bay Area, and Central Valley, California. Northern California, my territory, where if you are in need of prosthetics, you're probably going to run into me. But I want to thank Synergy Prosthetics for this segment of the show. Segment 3, the real facts about limb salvage. As we can tell from our last segment of the show, cost is a big issue when it comes to your decisions that you're going to have to make. It's going to have to be the same thing, but on a different plane when you're talking about limb salvage. Salvaging a limb, there have now been several studies that compare the results of limb salvage and amputation. As you have heard from me reading some of the stuff that I've already talked about. Most of these studies are done, for the most part, on soldiers, veterans returning home from the war, rather than your average lay people. When it comes, which comes with its own set of caveats. So when we're looking at veterans versus normal everyday citizens, there's something to be taken into account there. Remember, I said there's groups of people that they've done these studies on. There's traumas, diabetics. Now we're getting into other studies that were done on veterans returning home, guys that have served our country, been blown up, shot, injured, lost limbs. Well, what's the difference between them and your average layperson? Well, the majority of these guys are young. The majority of these men and women are in great shape. They don't have a lot of health issues or problems. So when we look at studies that are being done on them, can you really take those studies and use that information for just your average layperson? I don't think you can. It's tough to compare apples and oranges. Your insurance company says you have 10 therapy sessions. Your insurance company is going to set limits. Your insurance company is going to determine how much of a prosthetic leg you get. And they're basing this information on these studies. Now, do you kind of see why limb salvage versus amputation is a major decision to make? Because once you make that decision, it starts the whole other process of what you're going to be getting into, dealing with your insurance company. Patients who undergo amputations tend to get through rehab more quickly. Studies have shown this. Whether you're a veteran, non-veteran, layperson, average Joe. They also have fewer surgeries. Some studies, patients who undergo limb salvage report a higher quality of life. Now, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. The majority of people that I know with limb salvage, I see are walking with severe limps, or they have a leg full of metal or components inside their body. You hear the stories where all of a sudden a screw is popping out. So when they say report a higher quality of life, who is reporting that higher quality of life? Remember, who did the study and on what specific type of people did they do the study? All determines the outcomes. So in other words, the results are opposite when you look at limb salvage versus amputation. They're always going to show that limb salvage outcomes are better than amputated outcomes. Because keep in mind, all the costs and everything that they don't want to get involved with an amputation means you're stuck in a wheelchair, because the cost gets greater the minute you try to apply a prosthetic device to the amputated limb. So you're kind of in a pickle. Now, these studies also don't take into account a lot of the other things that most patients go through. And I think some patients, trauma-wise, experience a lot more on the emotional side. PTSD, substance abuse, problems with mood swings, mood disorders. Prolonged infections can also be issues with wound healing. And we're talking about amputation, but limb salvage also has its issues with infections and prolonged surgery after surgery after surgery, which can deliver emotional, devastating blows to a person being in and out of the hospital. It's hard to make sweeping statements about which is better or the better choice, limb salvage or amputation, because so much of this depends on the severity of the injury and the person. Above knee amputees have a harder time learning to use their prosthetic device than below knees. For example, I'm a below knee, my boss isn't above the knee. There are certain things I can do that he can't do. When I go to get in my car, I can just pop my leg off and get in and drive. For him, he can't do that. It's not so easy. Because I think they try to lump a lot of things together. Many of these results are solidified with what might seem obvious, but the participants and some of these variables that they're missing. Participants with more functional lower limbs tend to have better quality of life than those with less functional lower limbs, regardless of whether they underwent an amputation or limb salvage surgery. There's so many variables that go in. Do you have a short limb, long limb? Do you have a bony prominence? Do you have a lot of meaty tissue? There's so much that goes into this when you're talking about limb salvage versus amputation. And I'm trying to put this out there to give you food for thought. If you find yourself in this situation, it's not such a cut and dry, easy decision. Yes, I have a lot of faith in some of the surgeons that are out there. They can do amazing things, but it's going to be you that's going to have to deal with this, the aftermath of either one. It's going to be you that has to deal with the pain, deal with the frustration. Now, keep in mind, in the last 15 years, prosthetic technology has advanced steadily. It has advanced in incredible ways. These days, perhaps because of how much coverage I think prosthetics get, we got this movie with The Rock coming out. Yes, Eric, I'm going to give you a shameless plug here. So we have this movie with The Rock coming out called Skyscraper, where he plays a guy with a prosthetic leg. And we've had other movies. In fact, the other day, me and Heather were watching a movie, Downsizing, and they had an amputee in there, and he broke her prosthetic. It's pretty funny. But I think when you look at it, that it's getting that type of attention, it's making some people opt sometimes too quickly to jump for the amputation. You're going to see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson jump off a thing and cross a building and grab on the stuff. Yes, I think YouTube and some of these other things are making amputation a very viable option for a lot of people. But I think some people have to understand it's all different depending on who you are and what happened and your level of injury. I had a patient like this. He was an older gentleman, and he was watching guys play softball on YouTube, and he's 80 something years old, and he thought he was going to be an above the knee softball champ, man. And no, it's not going to happen that way. And it's unfortunate, but yes, we see a lot of advances in technology and prosthetics, and it is getting a lot more attention when we have people like that. By the way, July 13th is National Amputee Movie Night. Eric wants you guys to get out, check out this movie with The Rock in it. I'm going to go check it out. If you guys can go check that out, give a shout out on Facebook to my page and let us know that you went to the movie. But I do think the fame that we're seeing with some of the amputees that we have out there doesn't speak for the whole. There are people who are amazing amputees. I work out with a guy right now, Dave, the one-legged Spartan. This guy is a beast, and he's an awesome inspiration. He gets me up, and we go do Spartans together. Incredible guy, man. Incredible guy. But everybody's not like that. But I think perhaps more slightly, or how can I say, just as prosthetics have advanced, the technology available to the surgeons to rebuild and save limbs has advanced also. So when you're looking at prosthetics advancing, limb salvage has also made its leaps and jumps and bounds, doing better at salvaging limbs. So you're kind of in a tough spot when it comes to choosing which one is going to be better. There are much better implants to stabilize the bone. There are much better wound care uh, options out there to salvage soft tissue. Valley Wound Care, they're great at what they do, and I think they help a lot of people. But there does come a point when we have to make that choice, which is better. Not so much as a cut and dry thing. A lot of things are going to have to be analyzed and talked about. Doctors can now graft veins. They can do all kinds of stuff. They can get more blood flow moving again. So when you're looking at all this stuff and all the majestic things that surgeons can do, it is a tough choice. Now, limb salvage, when we look at the choices between limb salvage and amputation, it is rarely clear. The question is what's best for any given individual. Some people, when faced with the option, say amputate, and others will say save it at all costs. The decision is different for each person. Many of these studies don't take into account the entirety of the person's life. And there are things that they don't capture. Take, for instance, the support system the patient has. We talked about that. So when we're talking about limb salvage versus amputation, people see an amputee and they recognize the disability of an amputee. It's very obvious. They understand what it is. It's something they can wrap their head around. That's not the case for a person who has had multiple limb salvage procedures. People who still have their leg, even if it's in bad shape, even if it doesn't work that well, or cause them pain, or how it's held together, most of the time, you're in so much pain because you have so much metal in that limb. They don't get the same kindness from the community as an amputee would, per se. That there can be something that needs to be considered when you look at the two. Even though amputees have body image issues, people staring at them because of their prosthetic, there's so many things to consider when we're talking about this. There is still a lot of doctors that don't know about the outcomes and can't really tell you a lot. It's one of those things to where you're almost taking a crapshoot when you're dealing with limb salvage versus amputation. And I guess one way to think about it is when you think about it, how about you can't sit comfortable? You can't go upstairs. You can't walk without a cane. You can't walk for long distances. Your leg's always in pain. So when we think about limb salvage versus amputation, it's different for everybody. There's so many different variables at play in a person's life. Now, as we're getting ready to close out the show here, move into segment 4, I want to talk about what advice would I give someone trying to decide between an amputation or limb salvage. I know that's kind of where everybody's been sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for me to say this. So when we get into this, what advice would you do? What would you say? I think what I would say is it's important to think of your whole life, not just the one thing you want to do, but you need to think about your life as a whole. Think about all the things you do or want to do, not just one thing, all of it. If you're looking at just one aspect and thinking, oh, I can't wait to run or walk or to stand, I need that amputation. I'm going to do an amputation instead of limb salvage. You need to think about it. And think about it from the standpoint of, will gaining that one activity provide you with enough satisfaction for that amputation to be worthwhile? It'll be with you for the rest of your life. That would be the advice I would give you. Before we move into segment 4 of the show, we're going to take a little break. Segment 4 of the show. As we get ready to close out our show here, we're going to play a little devil's advocate with point counterpoint in Is Limb Salvage Always Best? Segment 4 of the show. We're going to kind of kick around some food for thought. We're going to play devil's advocate and give you some goods and bads, pros and cons. I would like to thank Dr. Brayton of OrthoMed here in Modesto, California, for sponsoring this segment of the show. I got to get him on the talk show here pretty soon, because he is one interested guy every time I go see him at his office as we work with patients. And I think he has something to offer. For those of you that don't know, he's one of our special co-hosts of the show here at Amp Life Talk Radio. And I'm going to be lining him up for a special talk with some of our others, Dr. Vinya, Dr. Tallier. You're all going to get to meet these guys before the end of the year. Very busy surgeons, very busy people. It's hard to get them tied down for, 15, 20 minutes to be able to have them on the show. But we're working on it, and hopefully we're going to get them on the show, and you can get to hear some professional expert advice, opinions, and just them talking in general about amputations and orthopedic surgery. So thank you, OrthoMed and Dr. Brayton, for this segment of the show. Point counterpoint. Is limb salvage always best? Well, I guess that depends on what type of patient we're talking about. As we've mentioned before, diabetic, trauma, or disease-related patients, they all are different and they all present very different variables. We're talking about a person's life. That presents a whole different set of circumstances, which makes this answer even harder. It's so hard to answer that question. It's not a simple question. Some professionals seem to think aggressive limb salvage in people with diabetes leads to an overall reduction in costs, not only economically, but also from the patient's perspective. The vast majority of diabetic patients with critical ischemia are actually good candidates for limb salvage. But they're also good patients for amputations. It's really hard. It's really hard. A patient that has a deformed foot that requires intense supervision, surgery, care, a major amputation below the knee or above the knee may be cost effective, more cost effective, in fact, than reconstruction. Charcoal foot. Recent analysis demonstrates that lifelong costs for major lower limb extremity amputations can be about $500,000 in cost. You heard me say that early, and I messed up, said 5 million, but it's $500,000. That's where we get at. They have 509, and I think the one before was 530 something. That's a lot. And it's, according to these studies, always 3 times higher than the cost of undergoing reconstruction or limb salvage. The cost for a patient after amputation depends on 3 characteristics: the type of prosthetic device, the level of limb loss, and the functional capability of the individual. Again, like I have said throughout the show, this is not an easy topic or an easy A, we'll say. It's not an easy answer. When you look at the 2 of these, it's very hard to make a determination which is best for which patient. But one of the things you can count on is these characteristics and factors: prosthetic type, level of amputation, and functional capability are going to be very crucial if you do go down the road of amputation. Something to keep in mind. The main cost for patients with amputation will continue to rise due to increasing life expectancy, how long you're going to be around. That plays the number 1 role in costs, amputations, how your insurance is going to look at that. You're a 20-year-old dude and you got an amputation, they are not liking you at the moment, especially if you're above the knee and you're looking at a micro compressor knee. Costs. An argument against limb salvage is that primary amputations prevents or shortens the course of wound care and enables the patient to become ambulatory, albeit with a prosthesis, faster really is. However, in the modern era of vascular surgery and surgeons, revascularization can be performed successfully with minimal mortality and has an excellent rate of limb salvage. Like I said, vascular surgeons are getting a lot better. Orthopedic surgeons are getting a lot better at what they do. It makes it even harder to do or to make that choice between the 2, limb salvage or amputation. It's not an easy thing. Sorry, I'm getting hungry. So when we talk about this, I wanted to make sure I just put this on the table. We kind of lay everything out there. You get an opportunity to look at it from all perspectives. And I'm not saying I'm for one or for the other. So, but I'm also trying to be very honest with what you're going to be up against. And cost is going to play a role. It will definitely play a role. So if you find yourself in this situation, one of the things that you and your surgeon should consider are the following options. Carefully select a plan of care and treatment based on the patient, your risk factors, wound factors, your ambulatory abilities, your patterns of disease, meaning your health history, severity of injuries, your living status, your support system at home. If you are looking at this, there's a lot to take into consideration. Hopefully I covered some of that for you. Hopefully this show shedded a little light. It's not as cut and dry as you would think. And if you are out there and you did go through years of limb salvage to come down to an ending where you were amputated in the end, whether you wanted it and forced it or whether it happened despite all the salvage attempts, you're going to have some emotional issues anger. Why did I do this? Why did they do this? Hopefully you understand a little bit better the choices that were made along that process. It doesn't make it right, but I think having knowledge helps you understand, and hopefully it'll help you process some of what you're going through better. Amputation and limb salvage is all about cost. I hate to be the one to say that, but from the studies that I have read, the information I've read it's definitely that. As we wrap up the show, I want to throw you some numbers out. Limb salvage in people with diabetes is an urgent public health issue. I cannot stress that enough. Today, 29 million adults have diabetes, nearly a quarter of whom are undiagnosed. 90 million US adults are glucose intolerant. Diabetes is by far the most common cause of non-traumatic amputations in the United States. This is according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which estimates 73,000 non-traumatic amputations occurred in 2010 and about 44,000 in diabetics. That means nearly 2 million Americans are living with an amputation today. That will rise to 3.6 million by 2050. We can't ignore the economic burden this places on the country. In 2014, primary amputation cost to the healthcare system was $11 billion annually, and that is expected to grow to more than 25 billion in the next several years. It is important to keep in mind that Medicare covers over 80% of this cost, leaving you with 20%, whether you have a secondary insurance or whether it's coming out of your pocket. Medicare is being overburdened by these numbers. Cost is going to play a big role in prosthetic care in the future. I would like to thank all of you for listening to me talk about the subjects that hopefully are important to you. And I am so thankful for everybody that listens to the show, tuning in on Facebook and here on the podcast. So thankful. Tonight was a show that hopefully it touched you. Hopefully it gave you some information. Hopefully it explained some things to you. I am hoping that shows like this, yes, they're not all exciting. I'm not talking about really cool stuff, but I'm laying out some information. And hopefully, if you find yourself in this situation, this helped a little bit. If it didn't help you, hopefully it'll help someone else. I would like to make sure that I give a special thanks out to all those that have reached out to me and contacted me through Facebook as I help you with just talking and being support for you. I'm very thankful, and that you contacted me and trust me to basically help give you some information. I'm also very thankful for Amputee Coalition of America. I've been doing some peer counseling through them and doing some peer visits. Zach, man, hey, I saw the birthday stuff, and hey, great job on the job. We'll be catching up soon. Eric, I didn't forget, guys, please, July 13th, The Rock and his new movie comes out, Skyscraper, where he plays an amputee wearing a prosthetic device. We want to make that our national amputee movie night. Please go out and check that movie out. And I'd like to hear from some of you. When you see that movie, please hit me up on Facebook and leave me some comments. I might actually start a post on that to get some feedback on your thoughts about that. So if you're listening tonight, I appreciate it. And be sure to check us out And you can hear us on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Spreaker.com. That's where we are live and local. You can listen to us anytime, day or night. And also, if you want to get all the latest updates, go to Google Play Store and download the official Amp Life Talk Radio app. I am so thankful for each and every one of you. Pass this show along to whomever is important to you and who you think might get something from the show. You can also follow me on Facebook, Sean R. Harrison, or Amp Life Talk Radio. For those of you who are on Twitter and Instagram, the handle Amp Life COM is the handle there. I sure would appreciate some comments and feedback on my Facebook page. Hey guys, I read everything, and trust me, if you reach out to me, I'll reach back out to you. I'm so thankful. So hit me up on Facebook, Amp Life Talk Radio. Leave me some positive feedback. Leave me criticism. Leave me whatever you want to see from the show. I mean, I don't care. I'm going to read it all, and I'm going to try and do what you ask. Again, I'm so thankful for Ashton being on the show with his book. Please check him out and go to Amazon. You know what book I'm talking about. It's Moesha the Elephant. I'm going to be getting more of those copies, and get a copy and share it with someone. I think they will truly appreciate it and get a whole new perspective on amputees and what we go through. Again, hit me with that feedback and share the live shows, guys. That's how you're going to win those coffee mugs. I am so thankful for each and every one of you. I cannot wait until the next show. I do have some surprises coming up, so make sure you catch the show. And I want to thank you again for listening to Amp Life Talk Radio.
You are listening to Sean Harrison on Amp Life Talk Radio, a place for amputees and those dealing with limb loss. The views expressed on the show by the host, co-hosts, and guests are their own. Always seek medical advice from a licensed medical professional.
And back on Facebook, guys. Hey, thanks everybody on Facebook. I appreciate you letting me close out the show there. Had a little hiccup in the beginning. And man, I'm getting to where these hour-long shows, holy moly, I'm trying to keep stuff at 35, 40 minutes, man. What the heck? Well, hey, either way, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And hopefully you don't mind my little setup. It's going to get a little bit better here to where you just have a tunnel vision of just seeing me. So, and I appreciate it. Hopefully end of the year, we're going to have the YouTube channel up and running by then. Hey, Susan. We're going to have that up. What's going on, Richard? Thanks for sharing, Richard. I'll read that. I appreciate everybody sharing their comments. I'm just looking through some of your comments. Clarence, hey, buddy. Thank you. Donna, thank you. Glenda, hello. And no, it's okay. You were at the gym. No worries. You can tune in. I ramble on long enough to where everybody can join. So Tamara, hello. So hey, I'm just kind of looking through all this. Hi, Jamie. I just want to thank all you guys for tuning into the show, making it a good show, and I appreciate all the support. Eric, I put it out there, man. Skyscraper. Friday, July 13th is National Amputee Movie Night. Everybody go out and check the movie out. And I would like to hear your comments on the show and your thoughts. So everybody go check that out. I'm going to go look at it myself. So I'm going to come back and do a review of that. So Dwayne The Rock Johnson, man, you better do us right, or we're going to have a problem. So if anybody has contacts with The Rock, send it my way. We need to do an interview. We need to talk about this. If you're going to be representing us, you need to speak to us, the people that live with this. So I'm trying to represent us right, man. Make sure the Rock understands that he's got some big shoes to fill when he tries to play an amputee, man. So Y'all reach out to him. Thanks for the love, everybody. Y'all have a good night.